Okay, welcome to another edition of 10 Questions in 10 Minutes, where I get to quiz ABA CEOs on operational business topics. The questions have been provided beforehand, so there's no gotcha moment here. And by choice, the questions are of the yes, no, and choice variety, because that will then allow for a definitive answer. And also, once there is a set of questions of people that have been interviewed, we'll have some good statistical data to see what CEOs are thinking of. So it's a pleasure to welcome Jonathan Mueller. I know Jonathan longer than anybody else I know in the field. And if I were to date us, I would say it was 1995 or 1996 is when I got to know you. And I like the idea of saying that you're the person I know longest in the field, so stick around, my friend. Don't leave.
No
Anyway,
place.
so we're getting better at this in terms of the interviews where like the title is 10 questions in 10 minutes, and they sometimes tend to be longer than 10 minutes. But we're going to try and be very efficient here, and we're going to jump right into the questions. And the first question will then also give you an opportunity to address yourself. And very specifically, the question is, do you think a CEO in ABA is better served coming from outside or coming from within? And you're kind of a hybrid of that. So maybe you're in a good position to answer that question. What do you think, Jonathan?
Unquestionably within the field. And here's some data, Ro. By the way, it's absolute honor to be on here. So thank you for having me. I'm going to ask you to throw one softball or one curveball question at the end that I haven't like seen yet, so we got the reality. So I was taking data back in I think 2022, 2023-ish. There's this wave after COVID where a lot of the larger multi-state ABA companies were exiting their CEOs, or CEOs chose to exit, not sure. And I want to say something like, of the 12 that I tracked that had left, whom I knew, 10 of those were from outside the field. So I think there's something about we are a human services business, and being able to relate to our clinical teams is phenomenally important. At the end of the day, and a BCBA relates to their clinical teams way better than someone coming from outside the field, who, even with the best of intentions, might inadvertently lead BCBAs to and RBTs to think they're over indexing on things like KPIs and cash and P&Ls and all that stuff.
All right. I love a definitive answer. Did I introduce you as CEO of Ascend? If I forgot to say that, CEO of Ascend.
I have I call myself a co-owner and a co-founder of Ascend.
All right. Awesome.
7.5 years. It's been an honor.
Okay. So I appreciate where you're coming from. And I would say interestingly different from the conversations I've had so far. So I love the fact that we're getting different points of view out here. The second question, so when you think in terms of your organization, you want to make sure that things are running to course, whatever you decide that might be. And I should also caveat that these questions are more to do with business and operations versus the clinical side of things, for which I think I have little or no value to provide. So wrong person to ask those questions. But given the operational bent of this conversation, I've given you a list of KPIs. My question to you is, what would your top three be?
So number one would be number of direct treatment hours per BCBA per week. Second is going to be
Mhm.
total volume of direct treatment hours for prior week. And third will be the 120-day net collection rate. It feels very important to have a cash collection metric in there. I'm not sure. I don't think that was in the original
No,
list.
that's not on the list, and you're right. That is an omission that we should fix because that's kind of one of the hidden dark secrets of our universe. Great. Growth strategy. De novo versus acquisition. Which one would you choose?
De novo.
De novo. Can you speak a little bit in terms of why?
I've lived both. I have most painfully lived when I was part of a larger multi-state ABA provider, doing acquisitions. And candidly, I think acquisitions are, I read a case study once, way, way, way back in B school, that I think that made a compelling argument that acquisitions done when you're acquiring physical assets and products tend to generate more shareholder return for public companies than do acquisitions of human services business, or sort of like soft capital type businesses. I'd have to go find the actual source of that, but that was exactly my experience. As an acquirer, we are entirely being a human services organization. As an acquirer, it's just really hard, even if both cultures are somewhat simpatico and values aligned. It's just hard to integrate culture, and so it's very easy for acquires to end up getting blamed for anything that might go wrong, whether it's a paycheck issue or a change in policy or a higher level of accountability for clinical standards or anything else. And I live that. So I think it's easy to destroy value when you don't get integration absolutely correctly. And the reality is, in growing certainly home-based services, that's very capital light. Even centers, a lot of the data that I see out there, it's reasonably capital light as well. So it's much better just to ensure your own replicable product or service that you know how to control, that you know how to train your team on, that you know how to measure success with. You're investing in quickly growing it out yourself.
Awesome. I sense we have an MBA in the house.
I call it my rickety MBA. Not that it's worth much.
Okay. And you kind of alluded to this one, but when you think in terms of your service model, and obviously it's hard to be 100% one or the other, but center-based home or a hybrid?
So let me first start by saying I think it's really important for an organization to have conviction around a strategy as opposed to just saying, hey, we get the best operational leverage out of a center, for example, or it is most capital efficient to start home-based services. So like start with the strategy as opposed to what everyone else is doing around you. I think a combination strategy, and spoiler alert, we do both. A combination strategy makes sense. Number one, there is a distinct need and niche for families out there who want the convenience of home-based services. And look, I think that's a broader trend across more of healthcare. We don't talk about that a lot in ABA, but the advent of urgent care coming to you or being able to do telehealth from the comfort of your home office, that's where our society is headed. So, and we see real need for home-based services. At the same time, there is power in the culture, ability to provide high quality on-site supervision, instructional control, and the operating leverage that comes from operating a center. And some families just want center-based services. So if you can do both well, they're two very different models.
Hmm.
So if you can do both well, then I would argue for that as your strategy. And just with the caveat that, as you add 1 degree of freedom on something like service location delivery, I don't think it like increases by one. There's like an exponential increase in complexity. So just make sure that you're planning and getting ready for that complexity.
The follow-up question is, do you then let the geography and the demographic circumstances dictate what you end up providing predominantly, or is there a target percentage that you're aiming for?
We do more of the former. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but I would say in the communities where we have both center and home based, we see about 70-30 interest in home base versus center. Now, we don't have a ton of centers out there, so maybe that informs it a little bit. But just on average, we get more families interested in home base than the center.
Well, the related question then is your focus in demographic focus early learners or kids of all ages? And
Our
does
focus,
that make a difference in this choice?
I think absolutely. So our focus is ages 6 and under. So we
Okay.
are early intervention. I do think that lends itself to a really specific sort of client journey, if you will, from, diagnosis at age 2 or 3. You spend a couple years, maybe, some of that initial time in a home environment, learning some of those skills, then subsequently in a center where you're learning the kinds of skills that a kiddo is going to need to move into a typically developing kindergarten with minimal to no supports. So I think there's a really nice like client journey and skill set and behavior journey that comes along with that. And so that's what we try to do in ideal circumstances.
I was intrigued about like the parents' experience and motivation. And at least there's some people that say that, especially with younger kids, going to a center is like going to a daycare center. And there's something good about that. And in addition, obviously less of a need for them to be present, which they would have to be at home, which means the whole day is tied up on this potentially versus, all the other things that life takes, over with.
Yeah, I think, there's a dirty little secret here that insurance companies never want to hear, but respite is a real thing for families,
Mm.
right? So the ability to drop a kiddo off at the center, have some time then to, spend with your other kids or with just the rest of life that needs to go on, I think can be enticing. So I think that is real.
But nonetheless, in your experience in the areas where you do have centers, the demand pattern still is 70% home and 30%. in center, even with families with younger kids.
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah. There's a convenience factor. Now, part of the caveat here is, 80% plus of the kiddos we serve across Colorado and Arizona where we are on Medicaid. And so, transportation is a real barrier. In fact, I saw there's a study that came out of the Colorado Anschutz, oh gosh, it was the University of Colorado system that talked about like there are 58 specific techniques that a care navigator can use to try to just get a family initially to a behavioral health appointment. So these are all the things that can go wrong, right? And all the different tools they have to use. One of those, so we can't underestimate, the point is, we can't underestimate the importance of all of the potential barriers families face to getting services. One of those is transportation, and that's just
Mm.
reality. So if we can eliminate that barrier by coming to a family's home, then that is super powerful. But I think that the answer, if I were to put on my like less my operator hat and more like what's the right thing to do in this world hat, it would be that it's the wrong question to say home versus the center. The right question is in which environment is the family most likely to actually access ABA? That's the right answer. And if that means you're a center-based provider, you got to refer them to in-home, do that. If you're an in-home provider, you got to refer them out to a center, then do that.
And that makes sense. I mean, like closer to where I live in the Bay Area, especially around San Francisco or the East Bay, I think it makes it a lot harder, especially the more crowded parts, more urban parts of the East Bay. It'd be a lot harder to have centers. It just doesn't, it just makes it very hard for families. You talked about degrees of difficulty, and it's a good segue to block scheduling, which was maybe the one question I might have surprised you with a little. Do you do block scheduling or not? And what's the basis behind your choice?
We absolutely do. We've got
Okay.
it's 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. We got a block in the morning, 8 to 12, a block in the afternoon, 12 to 5:30, and then we'll generally run 4-hour sessions in each of those blocks. It's really, I got a funny story, Rohit. Early on, for the first year of Ascend, back in 2017, 2018, we actually gave families like unlimited choice. You want to go 7 days a week? You want to go 3 days a week? We could do all hours a day, short hours a day. And what we found separately from like the challenges of actually staffing that, it was a tyranny of choice for families. With so
Mm,
much choice, they just weren't sure what to do. And when they
right.
know coming in, hey, look, I can access like this blog and or this other blog. Here's how I'm going to conceptualize fitting this into my schedule. It just made it so much of an easier choice for families. And so it works for us because we're also early intervention, right? So we're not necessarily needing to see kids for many hours up till 9, 10 p.m. after school. But with that, it has worked extraordinarily well for us and more importantly for the families we serve to have the consistency of those blocks.
So certainly breaking up the day into blocks. What about days of the week? What are the constraints or what are the requirements that you put in terms of services? Are there any?
We have a consistent Monday through Friday schedule. So you attend
Five
all
days a
five
week.
of them.
Okay.
Yep, five of those for a minimum of one block.
And that certainly makes it a far more tractable scheduling problem for your schedulers to solve. Because otherwise, there's just too many degrees of freedom. It's an almost impossible situation. Like I said, I'm jumping around. So, what are your thoughts on school-based programming? Do you do that? And if so, why do you?
Yeah, so we do provide school-based programming. We're very fortunate in Colorado where schools are not allowed to say no to Colorado Medicaid providing services for in-school.
Right.
But that means that, so there's two parts. There's a service location, right? Do you in-school versus home or center somewhere else? The second part of that question is who funds it? We
Mhm.
do in-school program, both Colorado and Arizona, funded by insurance. We do not enter into contracts with school districts. And the reason we don't do the latter is in my 13 years in the field, those school district contracts depend on the vagaries of whoever the director of special ed is, right? You'll have someone
Right.
come in for 3 years, all about bringing in outside contractors, and you have someone come in and says, "Oh, get rid of all of them. We're going to hire one BCBA for 10,000 kids or whatever it is." So anyway, that's really hard to like build a sustainable long-term practice around. We're also early intervention, so it makes sense. We're going to have comprehensive programs with a high volume of service. So being able to work in preschools and or in schools like kindergarten, first grade, sometimes second grade, it makes sense for us to provide an RBT to be there for a portion or the entirety of the day. I would say that the operational challenge that we've run into is, again, you've added another degree of freedom where now you have a teacher potentially saying, "Oh yeah, be helping Johnny with their math worksheets. We're a medical service. We're not,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Right.
not equipped to provide that. So we found that it is a hard environment to control. We see a lot of burnout in our RBTs providing in-school services. And yeah, and there's just higher complexity. So we're investing a lot in updating our training and support for our team members, but it's a totally different environment from center and home.
And if I understand you correctly, what happens here is that the parents get in touch with you, contract with you, and then they approach the school. And the school provides the permissions because they're required to, and then you have an RBT participating in the learning process.
That's
Uh,
exactly right. It is so rare that a school will ever actually pull us in.
Got it. Summer. So you have this situation potentially where you have a lot of RBTs, but then the school year's over and you have a lot of RBTs with not enough hours. How do you solve for that? Or is that an issue, or how do you solve for it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say well under 10% of all the services we provide are in schools. And so,
Okay.
so it's not a huge issue. And I'd say most of those families, there are other skills, behaviors that they may want to work on that are more appropriate to in-home or in a center. And so we'll tend to pivot then and continue providing services to those kiddos, but in a different environment.
Multifunctional services or straight up ABA? But where do you fall in that, and what do you do, and then what's your philosophy behind that?
So I believe strongly in the idea of multidisciplinary services, but I'd come back to my earlier comment, have a strategy around it. Don't just say we need to fill up more hours in the center with with different kinds of specialists, because this is in our experience, and we provide psychologists who do ASD diagnostic testing. We've got about 8 psychologists across our 2 states. We've got LCSWs that provide family mental health support that we have in home and in center. I would say this is one of the biggest things that will exponentially accelerate your operational complexity and specifically your revenue cycle complexity. And so
Right.
we've learned the hard way over the years. And so it's really important to have intention. So why do we do the diagnosing? Because we've always found those are the longest wait lists, and we want to address the need we see in our communities. Why do we do LCSWs and family mental health support? We released internal data. And this is a provider working with a family and maybe siblings versus specifically with the kiddo. Our internal data tells us when there's a crisis in the family environment and there is proactive support from an LCSW, that child has a 3 times higher likelihood of achieving their intended graduation date. So we said this is a no-brainer. So that's our strategy around multidisciplinary services. Again, very different from just saying we're going to provide it all. Now, I will say we also work with SLPs as an example, and we just have our preferred partners in the community. But we said, hey, let's let those experts do what they do well when we've got a kiddo who needs an AAC device or additional support. So that's how we've approached other services, multidisciplinary services that we don't necessarily have under our own roof.
Do you invite the SLPs to your centers? Just makes it a lot easier for the families.
That's right, or in home, wherever the
Right
service
home.
is.
Yeah, if they're that's got it. Though I guess centers make it easier for the SLPs, right? You can see a
They do,
bunch of,
yes,
you know, see a bunch
yes.
of kids and you can just schedule that. But we're almost out of time, so I'm going to run through these. With regard to de novo and I guess growth generally, it's a two-part question. One, do you pursue a more urban, semi-urban strategy or a less urban, more rural strategy? Like where do you want to go next?
Urban, semi-urban.
Okay.
And as much as I would love to serve rural communities, it's just really hard to build a density of services that's going to get a BCBA full-time work and that works with funded remote telehealth requirements. You have access to a sufficiently sized RVT pool. So we think about building density in places where there's still need, but where we can actually get to the kiddos.
Okay. And then flooding the zone or distance between centers.
I think that's a football analogy, right? Oh my gosh, to know that my idol and mentor, Dr. Burma, is using a football analogy. That's great. Flooding the zone. Yeah, I just think about how parents choose pediatricians as an
Yeah,
example, pediatric dentists, right? I mean, yeah, you do want a good one, but you want one that's close to your house. That's how parents increasingly are choosing ABA providers. So I think much better to make sure you're closer to a family and they have access to that as opposed to these 20,000 square foot mega centers.
got it. We're done with our 10 questions, but if you have a minute or two more, I can ask you these two bonus questions.
Absolutely. I'm ready for the bonus questions. Hit
Well,
me.
you answer the first one, which is in-house diagnostics or outside the center. You're very much in-house.
Absolutely.
And maybe you then automatically answered the other question, which is if you think in terms of a marketing strategy for referrals or client growth, does it tend to be more digital or more diagnostics?
I would say the choice for us is digital or provider referrals, meaning
Mm,
pediatricians, diagnosticians in the community. And every day of the week, I'm going to choose the referral source relationship. So building strong on the ground relationships with those providers in our community that have need makes so much sense. So number one, once you turn on a referral source relationship, you have to do there's plenty you can do right to make it keep going. There's a lot you got to do wrong to stop that. And so that's powerful. Number two, we just believe in like providing value to pediatricians and diagnosticians and others in our community. So building those relationships is a way to provide value and better coordinate care back and
right,
forth with the needs of the kiddos. And you can shape referral sources to send you the right kinds of referrals. Our data shows us that I think it's 85% of the referrals that come to us from providers, pediatricians, diagnosticians are qualified, whereas I think it's 40% of referrals coming over the web are qualified. So, and
yeah,
no surprises there.
yeah,
Get some leverage out of web, but you just get a lot of other
yeah.
noise that comes with it.
Yeah, I guess the only, so totally agree with creating a quality differentiator, and referral relationships are a function of that. And I guess maybe the one kind of advantage, and it was circumstantial more than anything else, of the digital strategy is that it's an easy dial to turn, right? Um, but I mean, my instinct would be in agreement with you that referral sources are much more constructive to a longer term plan.
Yeah. You,
Are they, yeah, go
you're
ahead.
absolutely right. By the way, just to build on that, you're absolutely right that it is an easier dial to turn. I think if we had better in-house skill sets around
Mm,
doing that, we would absolutely do more of that and shape more of our qualified referrals over time. In our experience, it's just so easy to blow a ton of money
yeah,
hiring
yeah.
out marketing consultants and then just missing the boat on a cost per client acquisition that you're hoping to shoot for.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any particular topics that you would want to address, Jonathan?
When you mentioned the MBA a little while ago, one memory came up, like one of the most profound parts of my MBA experience. We went to Mumbai. So we went abroad and I think I did a project in social venture capital. One of the other groups in my cohort did a project on the Dabwalas. Are you familiar with the Dabwalas?
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So to explain, so in Mumbai, there is a whole network of individuals who will go and pick up the hot lunch from a worker's home and then bring that worker that hot lunch and so they can enjoy that meal. And we're talking there's millions plus
yeah.
people. And these dabwalas are all generally illiterate. Like they don't, and so they use signs and markings to do this. And Rohit, this is profound. So they have like Six Sigma level ability of ability to actually get those orders right. That is, pick them up from the right place, get them the right place, and like
Right.
phenomenally low error rates. And what I took away from this, actually, one of my smarter classmates helped to show me was high touch beats high tech every day of the week. And
Mm.
to this day, it's one of the things that has informed at least how I think about delivering services, how I think about the intake process, whatever else. There's a lot you can do efficiency wise, but when you're in a human services, patient driven business, there is no replacement for high touch.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Always illuminating talking to you, Jonathan, and a pleasure. And we were reasonably efficient with time to the extent that we weren't. My fault. Thank you, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you, my friend.